Well, hello, welcome back, everyone. We've had a really interesting morning. We got to talk a little bit about OTAs and about pushing our pricing out to the channels, including Expedia, Booking, Google, um, Verbo, and Airbnb. So I am exceptionally excited about this session. I have been a fan of Cindy Estis Green for a long time. I have watched her work for years, and she is the data guru of the hotel industry. She's the one who's been able to do all the benchmarking and revenue projections, and just kind of is the crystal ball for the hotel industry. She's also a big proponent of direct bookings, which, of course, for our industry is something that we find incredibly attractive. Cindy is the CEO and founder of Kalibri Labs. They do a lot of benchmark reporting. They provide consultancy and revenue management projections for for the hotel industry. So, Cindy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being here. It is my honor to welcome you to the Data and Revenue Management Conference.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm really excited to be here. So I have a lot of content and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to get right into it. I was asked to speak about profit contribution and cost of acquisition. I'm going to talk a little more broadly, and I'm going to focus on how the hotel industry sees the world, which may give some good perspective on how vacation rental, kind of the direction vacation rental may be moving. So the crystal ball that Amy was talking about is really based on data. We gather data from almost 35,000 hotels in the US, which is transaction data. So it's every booking, and we gather 100 million a month. We're actually closer to 10 billion at this point. The data that is contained in the database, because it's every single booking, we get channel data. So we know if it comes through OTAs or GDS or property direct. We separate out the group business and the FIT business to keep it clean. The call centers and brand.com, of course. So we also track by rate category, and that's the level of detail. It's kind of like market segment. So that in the hotel world, we call it rack bar or package, or loyalty member rates for the loyalty programs, promotions, advanced purchase, AAA. So government, consortia, corporate, all of the specific types of business, because if you don't track it, then it's hard to know kind of what's growing or what's shrinking or who's got what. We track length of stay, which of course in vacation rental is critically important. The longer your length of stay, the more efficient you can be because you need fewer customers to fill your place. But because we have the transaction level data, unlike any other kind of benchmarking available, tracking by length of stay becomes critical. Because the hotel industry has developed so extensively their loyalty and affinity programs, we want to track loyalty contribution. And then, of course, acquisition costs is an area that the hotel industry has not really paid much attention to, because for many years in the early days, it wasn't necessary to pay as much attention to it. It was much more static, and it was mainly like travel agent commissions. It might have been 10% of the business. At this point, third parties are booking half the business, and acquisition costs are now 15 to 25% of what the guests pay to hotels. So it suddenly has become a much more critical factor in the last 10 years, and the hotels are now just starting to incorporate it into their benchmarking, and we've been able to provide that data. Because we track cost of acquisition, we also look at revenue a few different ways. We don't just look at kind of what the guests, what is collected by the hotel. That is what is tracked typically in a hotel P&L, but we also track commissions that are paid directly to third parties. So when Expedia or Booking.com collects a $100 rate and they give 85 of it to the hotel collects it as an $85 rate, when in fact the guest paid 100. So we track what we call guest paid revenue, which includes those the portion that's collected by third parties that doesn't show up on the hotel P&L, and we collect what the hotel shows as their kind of take of the total. And then we have two kinds of net revenue. One we call cope revenue, which is people remember it to cope with their distribution issues, but it's really the portion of guest paid revenue after we take all of the direct booking costs away. So that's wholesale and retail commissions, loyalty costs, channel and transaction fees. And finally, we track another kind of net revenue, which we actually call net revenue, that takes all those booking costs plus sales and marketing costs. So that would be media expenses, direct sales teams, all of those kind of expenses in addition. The total, as I mentioned, is 15 to 25%. And we have many hotels in our database of 35,000 that are paying well above 25%. So this is a big chunk before the guest even walks in the door that hotels are paying. So just to see how this played out last year, the overall US hotel industry took in $173.2 billion. That's what the guests paid. If we take away the wholesale commissions, which is what third parties collected, that is $4 billion. So that brings us down to what the hotels showed on their P&L, which was 169.3. We then take away from that retail commissions. So those would be the commissions paid after the guest stay, like a traditional travel agent or booking.com model. We take away channel and transaction fees, and then for the branded hotels, their loyalty costs. That was another 10 billion across the hotel industry in the US, bringing us down to 159.1. And then we take away the sales and marketing costs, which were about 15 billion, bringing us down to 144.2. So the guests paid 173, the hotels actually kept 144. So it was 29 billion in total acquisition costs. And hotels never really think about, like, how much do I keep of what a guest pays? But we created a metric called revenue capture, which really looks at just net revenue divided by guest paid revenue. And for last year, it was 83.2%. That's the average. We have many hotels that it's 70 or 75%. But on average, because there's so many big branded hotels, the costs are a little bit lower, and it's 83.2. However, the previous year, it was 83.5, which means that 29 basis points were lost between 2018 and 2019. If the hotel industry had just kept the same amount of revenue as they had in 2018, just hung on to a little more of what came in, there would have been, the number's 491 million, about $500 million more in the pockets of hotels. So this becomes a really big number when you start looking at how hotels decide how much they're worth, because it's based on what their flow through or what their profit contribution is. And this causes the values of hotels overall to drop something like 5 or 6 billion. So it has a really big ripple effect, not to mention on an individual hotel alone, the costs that they're having to deal with. So when we look at the hotel's RevPAR, the revenue per available room, for 5 years, it grew really well. But when we look at what's happened over the last 5 years with revenue capture, it's continued to drop between 25 and 40 basis points, so 0.25 to 0.40, which may not seem like much, but if the whole industry, is losing $500 million a year just because they can't hang on to the revenue coming in, it's cause for concern and something to pay attention to. So as we think about what to do about this, the cost of the digital marketplace is expensive. So having to focus on profit contribution and really think about how much you're paying to get your customers, and think about surgically targeting, like, who am I really going after? Who can I really get business from? Because I can't go everywhere and I can't afford to pay for every single opportunity. So just to give you some statistics on what's happening in the hotel industry over the last 5 years, this is all hotels from economy all the way to luxury from 2015 to 2019. On the left side are the direct channels. So that's brand.com, voice, property direct. And in the middle is indirect channels. That would be the OTA, the GDS, and FIT. And then we have group separately. The only channels that have grown over the last 5 years are brand.com and OTA. Everything else has been either flat or declined. So what's happened is there was a ton of business that came, what hotels think of as property direct. Guests would call the hotel, drive up, walk in, and it used to be 50 or 60% of the business. Overall now, we've come down to 27% of the business that comes in that way, and it continues to drop. And what's happened is that business has split and gone online. It's either gone to brand.com or it's gone to OTA. And you can see from these numbers that over the last 5 years, brand.com still maintains an edge and an advantage. For in Europe, for example, those numbers are a little bit different because the OTA base is considerably higher. It's about double. And the brand.com base is the same or slightly less. So the balance between them is quite different in other parts of the world. If we look at the cost overall, and we think, okay, what are the elements of the cost that it takes to acquire a customer? We can look at guest paid revenue, which is basically how much we've taken in. And from the course of time from 2015 to 2019, we can see there's pretty healthy growth. If we index at 2015, we can see by 2019 it's grown 17%, which is quite strong growth, and that's good. The problem, and then we look at the other costs, channel costs, like the cost of connecting to the technology costs and GDS fees and that sort of thing, really haven't grown any faster than guest paid revenue, so have not diminished the profit contribution. Even the loyalty cost of the brands has not grown faster than guest paid revenue. Retail commissions, which are like traditional travel agent commissions or the commissions through Google, search, that sort of thing, pay per, cost per acquisition, as well as traditional travel agents like American Express, that's grown slightly faster than guest paid revenue, but of course the OTA commissions have grown more than twice as fast. So it's a combination, not that the commission rates have gone up, it's that the total volume going through those channels continues to rise. And that is a problem because once, you know, the OTAs may have been somewhat disabled during COVID, but stepping up right behind them is Google and probably Amazon and possibly Alibaba. And of course, your community knows all about Airbnb. So there are many players that are coming in, so there'll be many third parties. Right now, OTAs are the big one in the hotel industry, but that will be replaced with other third parties. So if we look at how these costs kind of play out, and we just look in the middle at property direct is the lowest cost. It doesn't cost much to have a guest walk into a hotel or call them up and say, I want a room. So we'll index that at 100, and if we compare the cost of that booking to those coming through the brand.com website or the voice channel, the call centers, those are 2 to 3 times higher. So definitely more expensive, but compared to the third parties like OTA or GDS, considerably less. The OTA and the GDS is, you know, more than 7 times more than a guest coming directly to the property. So third-party costs are definitely high, and they're not shrinking. They're definitely growing. So again, just to give you a little more, there's always a lot of interest in how the OTA business plays into the hotel industry. The demand has grown, as I mentioned, they're in total about 16%, and you can see the breakdown between those, it's called merchant model or net, which is Expedia generally has this model. In the US, they're the dominant player by far, and they're almost 10% of the 16%. They make up 10 of it, so 2/3 of it. And that means that the guest pays Expedia, and then the $100, and then Expedia gives the 85 to the hotel. So 10% of the total OTA business is coming in that, using that business model. About 5% is coming retail, which is mainly booking.com with a little bit of retail business from Expedia, which means the guest pays the hotel and then the hotel writes a commission check to Expedia or booking.com. The opaque business, which is the kind of bookings where the guest doesn't know the place they're staying and they get a much discounted rate, that is the only kind of OTA business that's actually been shrinking. So to get into a little bit of performance, this to me is one of the most interesting charts that I'm going to show you today. This is the overall hotel industry in 2019, and it's very helpful to see this to give context to what's happening and why the hotel industry is has a problem or is concerned about what COVID has done to their world. About 80%, so the RevPAR, the revenue per available room, after we take all the booking costs out of it, so we call it COPE RevPAR, for the total US last year was $81.10. If we look at what the composition of that $81 is, all of these dollar values add up to $81.10. So if we look at group and corporate, we can see that they make up, it's about $27.06, I think is exactly what the number is. So it turns out that's 1/3, 33.3% of the RevPAR came from corporate and group. This business, because of COVID, is not starting up yet. there's restrictions, as everyone knows, about group meetings, and a lot of the big corporate accounts that make up so much of the business travel market are not yet allowing their travelers to go on the road. There is a little bit of corporate in smaller markets, and the drive, those who have business who can conduct it by driving somewhere. But the overall top 5 categories or segments: rack bar, group, corporate, OTA, and promotion. And promotion is largely the loyalty member rate business, make up 81% of the total. And of that, 1/3 of the total comes from corporate and group, which is a kind of a missing piece that the hotels are going to have a very hard time replacing. So until that business starts coming back, there's going to be a gap in performance overall. This is across the overall US. It's very different by, luxury hotel versus mid-scale or economy, but it's a useful reference to have. If we want to then look at where has the growth been over the last few years, I mentioned that the brand.com actually has an advantage over the OTAs. A lot of that has been driven by the loyalty programs. And this isn't just the big brands. I mean, once the big brands put in these book direct and loyalty programs, even some of the smaller chains and independents started doing it. So as the red line shows the brand.com growth, or the percentage coming through their hotel's website, and we can see that grew in conjunction with the growth of loyalty contribution. So as 55% of the room nights that were sold in the loyalty program were coming through their loyalty members. So 55%, which is huge. And in some sectors, it's even higher than that. So the loyalty programs have contributed substantially to the base of the hotel. If we look at it by tier, upper tier is the luxury and upper upscale hotels. They've actually reached 59%. The middle tier, which is like hotels you might think of like Courtyard or Hilton Garden Inn, are already over 60%. That means 62% of their room nights are driven by somebody with a loyalty membership. Even in the lower tier, which is the economy and mid-scale hotels, this would be, Motel 6 or Comfort Inn, or some of the lower tier Country Inn and Suites. They're already are growing, and already even at 4 in 10 room nights. So it's a meaningful player and factor in the hotel industry. So if we want to look at how the direct bookings are comparing to third party, we just take brand.com and compare to OTA to keep it simple. We can look at some specific markets. So if we look at the top 10 markets, in every single one of them, the direct bookings have exceeded OTA business. The average is around 24–25%. And you can see in every single one of these markets, the blue bar is bigger than the red bar. So brand.com is higher. And even New York City, which has by far the highest OTA business, at 25%, even they have more business coming through their brand.com, which is encouraging for the hotel industry to be able to have retained and keep hold on that much direct business. If we look at the OTA business across, I think this is 15 or 20 markets, it's about 20 markets, we can see with the average being 16%, there are 15 markets that are actually higher than that. So there's quite a few markets that are still dependent on that business, but many of them still have an even higher contribution from their direct business. But so much is coming through online channels, and I mentioned that the only 2 channels that are really growing are brand.com and OTA. Everything else has maintained pretty much a flat position. So now I'm going to take you through a kind of rapid fire picture of what's happening this year. And of course, a lot of stuff happened with COVID. This map shows the revenue per available room decline by state. So you can have an idea of those that had 90% or more decline in their revenue per available room are in the darkest red down to the lightest color. So you can see which parts of the country had the biggest declines, and you can see everyone ultimately did have some decline. Giving you some more current data, we track data weekly. So this data is showing from the first week of May through the first week of September. The blue line is occupancy and the red line is average rate. The average rates are running at this point last week. The latest week was 41%. So at the worst period of COVID, which was April 10th, the week of April 10th, occupancy was down 77% from previous year. We're now, as bad as it sounds, we're still much better. We're only down 33.9% overall in the US. Average rate at its worst was down 43%. Now it's only down 24%. This doesn't mean the hotels discounted their rates. It just means that a lot of the higher rated business that they were getting stopped, and now most of the business coming in was at lower rates. So that's the reason why the rates are so much lower. So just to quickly show you kind of how this is playing out, again, that comparison, just looking at OTA and at the loyalty member rate business, are really the two primary segments that were in growth mode since the recovery began in May and June. And really June is when the recovery started, and that's when we started seeing some uptick. And the only uptick we saw was in OTA and in the loyalty member rate or promotion business of the hotels. The rack bar, which is their basic rates, were pretty much flat or declining. The group business, except for some COVID-related groups where they might have had first responders or medical teams or whatever, if you take all of that out of the mix, essentially the normal group business has been flat or declining. And then the gray line is everything else, which is corporate, AAA, advanced purchase, and government, and so on. So if you just look at the red line and the green line, that's what you want to pay attention to here. The red line is OTA, and the green line is the promotion and loyalty member rates. Overall, from luxury to economy, the OTAs still have an advantage in this period from May through September, but you'll see some differences that show up pretty quickly. The luxury sector, there's a much larger gap. The red line is much higher than the green line. The blue, dark blue line that you see that's sort of jagged reflects some of this spotty COVID-related group business. But when you just hone in on OTA and promotion or loyalty member rates, the OTAs have a big advantage. And the main reason is because the luxury segment of hotels depends, 45% of their business comes from group and corporate. So that just went away. So they're talking about half their business and they're doing whatever they can to fill. So they've depended much more heavily on OTA than ever because they tended not to have much dependence on that business. If we look at upper upscale, that would be like a Marriott or a Hilton. We've got still an advantage where the red line is above the green line, and we can see that same thing, the dependence, upper upscale hotels, 46% of their business is corporate and group, typically traditionally. So that business went away and they're doing whatever they can to fill, and they're taking business they wouldn't have otherwise. Now we get into upscale, and this would be more like a Courtyard or Hilton Garden Inn type of hotel. And the green line is actually starting to exceed the red line, which means that the direct business coming through the loyalty programs is actually starting to come above the OTA business, but they are running neck and neck. And this is good news for the hotels because the cost of acquisition is considerably less for that business. It's about double the profit contribution for direct business. So it makes a huge difference, their ability to get more business through direct channels. And whether it's their own promotions or promotions through a loyalty program, it's working. And just to give you some context, in previous downturns, after 9/11, the OTA business in 2002 spiked to 100%. Of course, the base was much lower, but it was still a huge spike. In 2010, following the 2009 recession, OTA business spiked to about 30%. So when we look now, we see that the direct business is actually giving the third parties a run for their money, which is good news. If we go to upper mid-scale, the same thing. We actually see the green line above the red line pretty steadily over the last month since the middle to end of July. Again, good news for these hotels because they're definitely getting higher profit contribution. And then if we look at mid-scale, which is the, a little bit lower tier, there was a big gap where the OTAs had a big summertime, big spike 4th of July. But since the end of August, it looks like the loyalty member rate has gained an advantage. So when we look at group bookings, which I mentioned has really been slow, cancellation rates have been steadily, are steady. And until the restrictions on group meetings is removed, this business is going to be very slow growing. I have some other data on airline ticket purchase through the end of 2020. So this is future bookings by various airlines. The chart that I'm showing you is for Chicago, New York, LA, Dallas, and Atlanta. There's been a little bit of improvement in a market like Dallas. Atlanta had a few upticks, but we're still, 60, 70% below previous year. So, we're not, it's starting to get a little better, but the airlines are still seeing a little bit of growth, but not very much yet. So just to give you a few other data points, looking at a market level, there were some interesting things that happened in the biggest part of the downturn. And if we just focus on April, May, and June, Q2, we can see that, not surprising, the leisure markets in Texas, California, and Florida specifically, but generally in the Southeast, were the strongest in RevPAR, but not always the highest in occupancy, but their rates were better. And we had quite a few hotels that actually their average rates were better this year than last year, which seems unbelievable, but a lot of these were beach destinations. Every one of the 335 markets we track in Q2 dropped in either occupancy or RevPAR. There was not a single market that was excused from that downturn. The ones with the biggest loss in terms of revenue also had the largest group in corporate base, and those were Boston, San Francisco, Orlando, Chicago, and DC. Those with top performers in RevPAR, every single one of them was in a secondary or tertiary market with a heavy drive-to demand. So Panama City, Pensacola, Ocean City, Hilton Head, Corpus Christi, all of the markets that, of course, we were coming out of the recession or out of the sheltered in place shutdown right as summer was happening. So there was a lot of focus on leisure business. And these markets were the ones that were the beneficiaries. It's interesting to note that these markets were ranked out of our 335 markets, they were ranked between 34th and 227th in RevPAR last year, and here they are in the top 10. So the world got kind of turned upside down. And then finally, looking at the top occupancy markets, again, everything was the secondary, tertiary with heavy drive-to capabilities. So places like, I had to look up, I admit, I didn't know where Victoria, Texas was, but a lot of these top markets were within 2 to 3 hour drive from major markets, Houston or San Antonio or Austin or, Jacksonville, Miami. So that was the reason, because people were comfortable driving, and a lot of them had leisure activities for the summer vacation period or spring break. Of the top occupancy markets, the best that it got, so as good as it was for these top markets, as good as it got was still only between a 47.7 and 56.8% occupancy. So they were still running only about 50%, when the national average for last year, for the whole year, was about 66%, and a little bit higher for Q2 because it's a busier time period. So just to let you know, we are taking a focus by market and looking. We have this Ahead of the Curve series. You can look on our website and download them. We came out with one last week on Houston. It looks both at the patterns of business historically and then projects it forward through 2023. We have the same thing for Atlanta, so feel free to download it and get a feel for those markets. We have 8 or 10 more coming between now and the end of the year. And, just to kind of summarize a few points that I like to give, indicate to hotels, and it probably doesn't, it's no different in vacation rental. Cutting rates is not going to stimulate demand, so don't start now. You can cut your rates in a day, and it'll take you 10 years to recover it. I also, in this question, which Amy had brought up in the beginning about, can you really affect your demand, and can you really decide how much you get through third party versus directly? You have more influence than you think, and you have to really think about where you're putting your time and your money. Like if you participate in promotions and you think you're being passive about it, and it really doesn't cost you much anyway, it does cost you. And that's taking time and money away from efforts that you could be doing to get direct business, which I know I mentioned earlier is twice as profitable. For hotels it is. It's probably the same in the vacation rental market. So for hotels, based on last year's numbers, per room night, there was a $10 to $12 advantage net of all costs per room night in getting the direct business. So a huge difference and worth paying attention to and worth consciously and intentionally going after that direct business and not just going along with every third-party promotion that comes your way. The other thing that has happened is there's been, obviously everyone's interested in contactless travel. You have advantages in the vacation rental market because you don't have the same model that hotels do with check-in and everything else. But the mobile apps that the hotels have introduced have really created a bias for direct bookings, because in order to get digital key or keyless entry, in order to do mobile check-in, you really have to book directly to get that. And that is a big advantage for the hotels to try to push more people to the direct channels. So I'm going to stop there and go back to Amy and see if there's any questions that have come up or any questions that anyone would like to ask.
Yeah, I think there's some question on the whole idea of brand.com versus independent hotels. Brand.com, does that include the big flag sites like Marriott and Hilton, or does it also include independent hotels when you're referring to that?
Brand.com is any hotel website, whether you're part of a big chain or it's your own hotel brand. So brand.com is sort of a generic name for your own website.
The loyalty programs are kind of interesting. I mean, it's something we've always wanted in our industry, never really been able to achieve. Sorry. Loyalty rate, one more question come through. Loyalty rates are priced lower than bar rack rate. So it's typically the first time buy, the new retail. If you combine promo, loyalty, retail, are hotels still gaining on OTAs and channel growth?
Yeah.
Do you want me to read that again? Sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, so if the question is, even if you account for loyalty cost and discount and everything else, we still, we ran an analysis in 2018 on this, and we looked at 80 million transactions. So we had a very large sample size. There was a $9 average rate advantage after discounts, loyalty costs, everything else. Any other kind of fees that might be incorporated into that, search engine fees and everything, $9 differential to OTA average rates. Yeah.
One thing, and it's a great closing, one of the best presentations to date, full of facts and easily understandable. And it's so true. If you guys are not following her, you need to. She's got videos on YouTube, on Vimeo. I mean, you can find her pretty easily. But Cindy, we would love to work with you on something in the vacation rental industry very soon. Thank you for doing this. I can't wait to work with you some more. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Honored to. All right, you guys, we're headed to the demo ground next. We're going to look at pricing tools and have our panel of judges in our Focusrite battleground style. Survival to the finish. All right, we'll talk in a little bit. Thanks so much, you guys.